Hey everyone, thank you so much for coming on this awesome panel to talk about DAOs. We have a great group of panelists. Maybe let me briefly introduce myself. So, hey everyone, I lead operations for a project called OpenLaw. We've put together a few DAOs. Aaron, my colleagues here, and Sam's also involved in the project. But we've put together the LAO, which is a venture-based DAO. Flamingo, which is a DAO that is for NFT collection, and then lastly, Neptune, a liquidity DAO that basically allows people to pull capital together to take different positions in DeFi protocols. So before we dive in, maybe I'll let everyone introduce themselves. We'll just start around here. We'll go Aaron, Sam, Jordan, and then Caitlin, if that sounds good.
Yeah, thanks so much, Pri, for pulling this together, and thanks to the Ethereal team for another great Ethereal conference. I'm Aaron Wright. I'm co-founder of OpenLaw, and I've been helping to build lots of these great DAOs and also do quite a bit of other work, including on the policy side. Really excited to be here.
Cool, thanks. Hey, I'm Sam Cassatt. Most recently, I've been working with some of the people on this panel to build something called the NeptuneDAO. My company I founded called Alignment Engine is working on producing alignment in computational and economic systems. One of those things that we're working on is helping deploy liquidity from the NeptuneDAO into DeFi, as many of those protocols bootstrap themselves. But previously, Chief Strategy Officer of Consensus and General DGen nowadays.
Hi everyone, I'm Jordan Garbis. I am the founder of, or co-founder of BeetsDAO, which is a group of 58 passionate people who met on a Discord, pooled our money together trustlessly. And I guess we're the definition of what trustless should mean. So we are focused on investing in the NFT space. We say it's spinning new ways to unleash the power of NFTs. And we believe that there's a flywheel effect that can come from both investing in, producing, developing artists, and building out eventually a public token that represents the portfolio that everybody can benefit from, and kind of the great leveler effect of what NFT can mean to the world comes to fruition. And so we're very, I would say, altruistic and forward-looking, and we're very excited to see what comes together from this space. So very honored to be here with this group.
Awesome, love that.
And I'm Caitlin Long, founder and CEO of Avanti Bank, not operating yet, but specifically designed to bridge the US dollar into our world. And also, for the last 3 years, have been appointed by the governors of Wyoming, respectively, to be on the blockchain task force / select committee as a private citizen to help guide legislation. And our signature legislation of the most recent legislative session, of course, was the Wyoming DAO bill.
Yeah, Caitlin, you've been doing God's work in Wyoming, so I think everyone in the crypto community is very appreciative of all the hard work. Actually, let's just dive right in. I mean, I'm assuming everyone who's at this conference knows what a DAO is, so we don't need to go into that. But why don't we talk about how one could set up a DAO and what the Wyoming legislation does to help facilitate those communities that want to DAOify themselves. So I mean, I'm happy to kick this question over to either Aaron or Caitlin, but if you kind of want to just talk about what's actually happening with DAOs in Wyoming. And I mean, I know I've seen stuff on crypto Twitter, but it'd be kind of helpful to hear from you guys, your thoughts there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the one way to just kind of wrap your head around DAOs, or at least the DAOs that are getting set up today, they're kind of like subreddits with a bank account and a whole bunch of different rules. So that they're this inchoate group of folks online that are banding together, and they want to usually do something that's pretty awesome or good for society. They want to collect things or support things or donate money and perform charitable works. These are all positive things for it, but there's no real structure around them. They're kind of like these amorphous blobs that are floating around the internet. They have lots of different technical tooling. There's turnkey solutions. Some folks are just using a multi-sig, and they don't really have a home and a way to interact with the real world. And that was the goal of the Wyoming DAO legislation. Really clever lawyers for a number of years have been thinking about ways to kind of peg or root a DAO in a traditional legal structure. And lots of lawyers have done great work there, but it's challenging and it's super expensive. I know when we were thinking about setting up the DAO in Flamingo, we talked to some prominent law firms, and they were telling us it would cost $200,000, $300,000 to do it, which was a bit eye-raising. And so the thought with the Wyoming legislation, it's a supplement to the LLC Act. So you can basically organize your DAO as a new subpart of an LLC. You can actually name it a DAO. So you can name something, ABC DAO, or whatever you want. And that means you can interact with the real world. You can hire people, pay taxes, acquire things, begin to really bring these groups that I think are super powerful and super exciting into the rest of the world, not just floating around Twitter, Ethereum, or the Ether and the metaverse.
And I would just add to that, the Wyoming law recognizes that you can have an operating agreement in the form of code. You don't actually have to have an operating agreement in analog form, which is the first time, to my knowledge, that that's been recognized legally, because most legal entities are on paper. But moreover, someone pointed out to me very recently, the Wyoming law requires a person to be involved and a registered agent to represent the DAO. So you've got to have some people named in order to set it up. So he was arguing that this isn't a true DAO. And to some extent, if you look at it that way, that is true. But to Aaron's point, the DAOs exist in an ambiguous legal sense. And in the worst case scenario, if there's ever litigation, they may be deemed to be general partnerships. This is the issue that lawyers have been concerned with DeFi for years. And it hasn't happened yet, but there's a very good chance that in the absence of some clarification, especially as more money gets involved in these, and you start to have more legal fights starting to happen because there's more money on the line, you really do want that clarification. And so what the Wyoming law does is give the DAO a legal personage. You become a recognized entity under the law. It is a specific type of LLC. Yes, there does need to be a member and a registered agent who set it up. And it is also really important to underscore that unlike other types of business entities that limit liability, like corporations or LLCs, that the Wyoming Secretary of State, in the event of fraud, can yank that limited liability away from a DAO. So that's the way that there is some ability to police the abuse of this. So basically, if you're not a legitimate project and you're looking to break laws or create fraud, don't even bother in Wyoming, because you won't get the benefit of the limited liability.
But the hope is with this, and with lots of technical advancements and enhancements that I think we're seeing in the DAO ecosystem, that we can quickly get to a position where we don't just see tens or hundreds of these DAOs, but thousands, millions, if not billions. And over the next 5, 10, 15 years, folks that want to explore this structure can do so, and hopefully it's as powerful of a structure as something like a corporation or a limited liability company. And that's the beautiful thing about the US law. That's the beautiful thing about Wyoming. We really, in many ways, are enabling folks to order their affairs privately, using code, using contracts, so that they can effectuate some social good. And this has been a huge year for DAOs. Maybe just to flag that, about 14 months ago, there was $10 million in DAOs, at least according to some tracking sites and services that are doing that. And it just eclipsed $1 billion. And I think that probably undercounts a lot of the projects too. So we've seen this exponential growth. We've seen it, evolve from just a couple hundred or a couple thousand people interacting with it, with these types of structures, to tens of thousands of people. And I really do think that this is the future. I think if we zoom out 10, 20, 30 years, we will see Silicon Valley in the cloud. That is probably a collection of DAOs. We'll see, different structures and different organizations that are really pushing things forward, and DAOs will probably be viewed as kind of the organizational entity for the internet age, not this relic of the industrial age like a corporation we're kind of a relic of today's age, which is a limited liability company.
Yeah.
And we've certainly seen that in Wyoming for sure, that we've been crushed with interest since this law was passed. It takes effect July 1st.
Oh,
Sorry, Pri, go ahead.
No, that's fantastic. It's great to know. And I love that Wyoming is on the forefront here, like bringing the rest of the internet and world into these structures. And, if we go backwards to 2016 with the original DAO, there was just a lot around the fact that there was no legal organization or a default, or the fact that the default legal organization is the general partnership, thus making everyone personally liable. And that gets really messy when there's an issue, which in that case there was. So I'm glad that we're kind of progressing as a community here. I guess, speaking of that, just general progression, we're seeing, Jordan left here, but we're seeing these different use cases emerge. Like obviously, as Aaron touched on, there's like, venture. It's not literally venture, but I guess if you had to, tie it to some Web2 component, it feels like venture, except it's entirely community generated. The decision making there, and that's really in the ethos of the original DAO. You have NFT collectives, beyond Flamingo as well. We're having now with Neptune, liquidity being pooled. So, I kind of, like Sam, I'd love to hear a little bit more about Neptune. I know that was launched a few weeks ago, and like what you feel about that use case, how things are moving there, and how the community aspect plays into this. Because as you mentioned in your intro, you've been kind of degenning independently. Like, what's it like in a community, I guess?
Yeah, I think community only enhances that, right? So it seems like things are becoming more interconnected, more community-centric, more distributed in the asset distribution in general, right? So if you look at the way a lot of the most cutting-edge projects are launching, they portray themselves as not having VCs often as a feature and not a bug, right? Because if you have a very concentrated set of ownership and wealth, it's actually less helpful for these distributed networks in the way that they want to behave game theoretically and in terms of the asset performance in general, et cetera. So for us, distribution, community centrism, like those things are a value add for us. And so, me, one person, like I can sort of emulate being in Discord chats and talking to people and having my own network of friends. But what Neptune is I think it's a spreading out of interest, and it's a spreading out of community connection and a way for us to access those connections and sort of source alpha, right? So we have basically a bunch of interested parties that are all community members, that are all, in many cases like leaders even in the community, that are all, collectively putting our wisdom together to understand how to do this. So I think the decision making, we're still evolving, right? And I'm sure the DAO has different decision-making processes, and in some DAOs, some of them are automated even. For us, it's a little bit more getting human consensus, and rough consensus leads to actual on-chain consensus. So those mechanisms of consensus are evolving. But for us, I think it's very enhancing to what we're doing in general.
Yeah, I think that's, with Neptune, Flamingo, the DAO, and I imagine we're going to hear more quickly about BeetsDAO too. I do really think that the most interesting things about DAOs are this hive mind approach. You don't have a leader, you have a group of people that are kind of working together, and that mind is able to actually sift through the torrent of information that we have online, right? No one person can do that by themselves anymore, or else they'll burn out like a fuse in a house or something like that. But by banding together, we're actually able to marshal and filter through this wash of information online. And then at the same time, I think there's a lot to learn on the governance side, and we're just starting those experiments. We need better tooling, we need more experiments, but I do think this notion that DAOs can kind of run like the internet, be a rough consensus, is a pretty powerful one. I think we'll see a lot more over the next year around that.
Yeah. I think you're totally right, Aaron. And I guess on Jordan, you're kind of on the other side, in the more outside of Flamingo, like on the more creative music side of things, and kind of came together after finding the community. So would love to hear more about BeetsDAO, the experience there, and like what exactly I mean, since we're talking about it, like what it's like operating a DAO in that circumstances. You could even tie that in with like the legal side of things. I mean, I'm curious to hear your thoughts there, and because that's the other thing Aaron touched on. We're all learning, like all of this is an experiment. Like what is most efficient to get these things running. I mean, maybe I'm going to segue into like some of the challenges after, but I'd love to hear from you about BeetsDAO.
Sure. Yeah. So I think everyone puts it exactly as I would, that the experiment in governance and the experiment in formation is very real, because we had all the intention of the world, with all the interest in the world, to in the beginning to make an acquisition of an Euler Beat original. We ended up buying 4. Now we're the largest single owner of Euler Beats originals. But it was that passion that the group had towards building the future of copyright, the future of royalties, and what Euler Beats represented that brought us together. And it's the expansion of that community out to that dream that we ultimately have of unleashing the power of NFT, of creating networks of communities that actually drive the long-term value of an artist versus the single kind of, I guess you can call them cash grabs, right? The idea being that communities have always been a part of the arts, and cultivating that community has been extremely hard to monetize without very specific connections to licensing or to to other monetization channels that are difficult for artists to reach. So for us, the network in itself is almost like a 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon. We have almost anybody that we can reach at any one time. We brought together, for instance, Snoop Dogg and 9cat that did a drop on 420. It happened to be that 2 members knew the right people that brought them together, but that led to other things. And so what we found is, as far as the network is really good at making introductions. The network is really good at developing kind of ideas together. But where we found the biggest challenges is actually project management. It's like, now you want to do something. You want to go from meeting people and having ideas to doing something. The doing something part is something that we're experimenting with now. Where, for example, we have project pods. And maybe eventually those pods become their own companies, because some of these ideas are really big. But that part of it is every day evolving. The decision-making, on-chain consensus that gets us to moving capital, but building is really something brand new. And it's something that we're all trying to figure out.
Yeah, I kind of like what you said about like these pods and stuff. It's like almost like forks of the original. I mean, we kind of saw that with like the LAO too, where it's like, the LAO existed, and then through that, like the members were discussing, then Flamingo came, and then Neptune, and like that's, I think we're just going to see like this network of different DAOs that emerge from one DAO, and I think that's actually really intriguing and special, and it's actually not so different from Web 2, where you're like being a Reddit community, and a group of people with some sub-interest of that Reddit community start a new, Reddit community, and it feels very similar to that, of course, with money tied into it. So God forbid we have to ever see ads in a DAO. I think I'd probably like die. So we're in a new phase. I guess that kind of hits on, all of us here are learning about DAOs and some of the challenges. I'm kind of curious, like, we've talked I've heard a lot about this in DAO clubhouses, and I always think it's an interesting conversation. Like, how do you incentivize the community? What are the hardest things about actually having a DAO? Like you were mentioning that sometimes execution can be kind of difficult, Jordan, but I mean, I'm kind of curious, like, is it like doing like these like sweat DAO models where people earn ownership over time, like, almost like a stock options, or what kind of incentives do you think may work, and what are you seeing actually hit? Because we're all learning in our own respective DAO bubbles. So curious, and this is for everyone. I mean, I think it's an interesting topic.
So I've seen recently, there's kind of this one issue which is sort of like, how do you get people engaged? And recently there have been a couple of projects that have proposed, sort of penalization for people that don't engage or don't participate in governance, because really what you want is that hive mind, right? You want everyone at once, or at least whoever is relevant and has knowledge about that thing to be participating. But the thing is also, there are people that are, maybe they never talk in the chat, but actually know everything and are talking to a bunch of brilliant people and are friends with Snoop Dogg and want to make that thing happen. And they're incredibly valuable too, right? So it's not an easy problem, I think, in general.
And I think just to follow on to that, we're experimenting with it, but one of the things that we're playing around with right now is the idea that those pods actually have equity associated with them. I don't know if they're all DAOs. Maybe some of them look more like companies than they do like DAOs. Maybe some of them build IP, but I think everyone generates those ideas. They should have some equity in those ideas, and the DAO should have the right to fund them. And those ideas maybe have the right to take outside funding, maybe from another DAO, maybe from somewhere else, right? But I think the idea being that if you're a creator, you should benefit in the creation as long as you're going to do the work. And it's not, ideas are worth nothing, right? That's why we need the execution, and that's why we're saying, let's figure out what this incentivization model is for an individual pod to come up with a concept and then take it to the end. And that's I don't have any results yet at the beginning.
I mean, it's funny because some of the stuff, these challenges that we're debating are ones that exist. Like Caitlin, you could probably speak to in corporate, like just governance at the state, federal level, but also like corporate governance, like shareholder proxy voting, like getting those votes in has always been difficult. And we'll like see like an actual study. I mean, I'm too lazy to actually, I'm sure there's plenty of research that has been done on like, voter apathy and how to get people involved. But it'd be kind of interesting to like take some of those learnings, because from my vantage point, like the Web3 model and just being digitally online native, it makes it so much easier to participate in these communities than ever before. So it'd be interesting to see some of like what's lacking there and what could be easily enhanced operationally through DAOs. I don't know if you have any thoughts there either, Caitlin, but always kind of interesting, because this isn't like, it's almost human nature when we're talking about organizations.
Absolutely, yeah. You can't take the human behavior out of the equation, because these are collective organizations. They're actually in some ways not new, because they have existed in the past. It's called mutuals or cooperatives, and you always have the free rider problem in governance. And then if you appoint somebody to be your governor, think about the CEO of a mutual insurance company or a mutual savings and loan. These things have existed for centuries. And then what happens is you get atrophy. I was early in my career very involved in the demutualization of all the big life insurance companies, MetLife, Prudential, John Hancock, et cetera. They all demutualized. And one of the reasons is they didn't have access to capital, because as a mutual, you're not a corporation and you can't issue shares. And so if your members don't give you more capital, then where do you go? And then the other one is just the management problem. The CEO started getting fat and happy, and there wasn't any real like external pressure on them to be efficient with the members' capital. These are age-old problems, because human nature never changes. But there's one other thing I would add. We were chatting amongst the group before the session went live, which is we still have some federal governance issues to sort out on what is the status of a DAO under the Bank Secrecy Act. And I know that phrase Bank Secrecy Act probably sends a cringe up a lot of folks' spines, but the reality is that any financial institution that is going to touch a DAO, the DAO has to be able to pass the Bank Secrecy Act, know your customer requirements. And so if it's going to be plugged into a traditional financial institution, it's going to have a legal status. It's going to have, an EIN registration number with the IRS if you're talking about a US-based DAO, right? So these are the sorts of things that I was always sympathetic with the Cody's Law folks, but right now that's not quite possible. That gets you into that general partnership realm of, if something goes wrong, then everybody's jointly and severally liable. So the better way to do it probably is, at least for now, to try to figure out how to get some substance that's recognized backwards compatible with the existing legal system, so that you don't find yourselves in a big hole. And that's, again, I can't thank the team at OpenLaw and Consensus enough for the help that they gave Wyoming. That DAO law it took a couple years to get there. But this year it got done. It's one of the signature pieces of legislation, and boy, it does look like there's a huge amount of interest in it for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just going to also add the thing that I find most interesting, just taking kind of a step up about DAOs, is all these questions like that Jordan and Sam and Pri were talking about around governance. We now can actually play around with it, right? There's a lot of inertia with existing organizations, just like there was a lot of inertia with the banking system, and Bitcoin and Satoshi and folks that were supportive of Bitcoin shook that up, right? They went from first principles and said, let's rebuild and reimagine what a, store of value, decentralized central bank could look like. And I think that that's been wildly beneficial. It's pushing people forward. With Ethereum, we have the ability to do the same thing for an entirely digital Wall Street, to reimagine that from the ground up. And now we have the ability to look with DAOs at the entire organizational landscape. Like, how are we going to organize our affairs and do things productively together? And there's a whole bunch of different tools and tricks and reputation systems, incentive systems, slashing, all these token economic concepts that we see in DeFi, et cetera. It's all going to have feedback loops and interplay. And I imagine through experimentation over the next couple of years, we'll learn some new patterns, and patterns that are probably better equipped to kind of handle today's time. So I just think it's super fascinating. I personally think, not surprisingly, that DAOs are probably the most interesting part of the emerging Web3 ecosystem. I think that if we can continue to explore this space together, continue to work together, this probably will be one of the most impactful parts of the blockchain ecosystem. Because finance is definitely interesting, NFTs are cool, but organizations have the most lasting impact. So if you're interested in that, you should reach out to us, and let's try to build this all together.
I just want to take it one more weird step and keep it, keep degen stuff and keep DAOs weird, which is that to remind us that, this is not just humans voting on like a board, right? Like this could be an artificial intelligence takes over one part of it, or, DAOs of DAOs are integrated in novel ways that would never be achievable with human governance and conversations and decision making. So I just want to keep it really abstract, because this could go to the next generation sci-fi levels of human governance and the way we structure our society even. So just throwing that out there.
I think in many ways it's like comparing apples and oranges when you're talking about traditional organizations, because like you can, like I said, like create like companies and DAOs that are literally linked by code and work together. It could be automated, like functions could be automated through smart contract. You as an individual have so much fluidity in these structures where you can participate, become a protocol politician, leave easily, come back. You actually are you're actually incentivized to actually participate in this community. Like there's a lot of major differences here that I think are really important to note. And thanks for doing that, because I think it's pretty important. But yeah, I mean, I guess I know we don't have a tremendous amount of time, but Jordan, Sam, I'd love to kind of just get your take on like what kind of DAOs you'd love to see, coming up, and like what else is up in the ecosystem that's actually like kind of animating your mind right now in the DAO world.
Well, okay, so I was just going to add on one thing, which is that I think it makes the whole ecosystem really unique, and this flows into your question, is that we are living in a global society, especially during Corona, where you don't need to have a face-to-face interaction in an office, and collaboration can be done anywhere. And I think what's really interesting about our DAO is that we are truly global. I mean, we are formed with KYC and all the other prerequisites that enable us to be a Delaware LLC, which we are, but it enables us to access ideas that don't exist only in one place in the world. And so like some of the things that we're seeing, for instance, like members have brought up some of these concepts. I think one very interesting one would be the idea of IP and technology. I mean, like, we're struggling with building platform right now. I mean, I met with a company the other day that would be a really interesting early stage investment, but what if, we could bring our developers together and we could build a platform? Who owns the platform? How's that actually work if we're going to commercialize it? But, I think there's a lot of really amazing tech direction that you can take, that if you start thinking about, this mutual concept of development, it should naturally flow into the open source world and into everything that Ethereum and smart contracts should be. And that should lead to capabilities that build on each other's shoulders. And you even see this kind of in all the NFT space right now, where every week you're seeing incredible innovation happening with artists thinking about new ways to engage with their communities, and the bar's getting raised. And so how do you use that kind of sandwich or building block effect to build the future of whatever globally?
I would agree on the IP front. I think that's a really cool idea. There's a cool DAO called the BeetsDAO that you can check out their white paper online, by the way, that's doing some biotech IP, and I love. But just to take it one step weirder again, I would love to see DAOs and governance systems that don't emerge from guys on horses that need to tell other guys in a different city what they think, right? That's what our entire governance mechanism emanates from, and the entire way that our legal system works. I would love to have it decouple eventually and have things that are almost like virtual jurisdictions, or we can take Caitlin's work and make it, take that writ large into the entire way that we structure society.
Yeah, I mean, you can definitely wrap up a DAO and choose a jurisdiction like Wyoming and have online arbitration using these types of systems. I think beyond that, just to talk about the next year for DAOs, if we're at least at $1 billion that are being managed now, up from 10 million 14 months ago, I imagine that we may see similar hyperbolic growth when it comes to DAOs over the next 12 months or 18 months, a little bit like what we saw with DeFi. I think we didn't get into it, but the tech tooling around DAOs is rapidly improving. We're seeing folks really just with Band-Aids and bubblegum put together DAOs at this point for the most part. But I think we'll see a lot more enhancements and improvements on the deep tech side. And then we're seeing super interesting use cases around creator DAOs and DAOs that are for specific purposes. And we're also, I think, seeing evolutions of how protocol level DeFi DAOs are operating. So I think we're in for a really exciting year. And finally, for folks that have been around the Ethereum ecosystem for a while, maybe we actually are entering into the year of the DAO. I know folks have been talking about that for a couple of years, but maybe that's 2022.
The era of DAOs is here. It's a great place to end it. If the four of you want to kind of just let everyone know how to get in touch, get in touch, I think that'd be great. But that's all, folks, I guess, for now. So I don't know, maybe Caitlin, then Sam, then Aaron, and Jordan, any last notes and or ways to get in touch would be great.
Follow me on Twitter.
Twitter.
Yeah.
No big guys?
I need to harvest mine. I'm at Sam Cassatt on Twitter and on Telegram.
For us, twitter.com/BeetsDAO. Twitter.
Cool. We'll stay tuned on the future of DAOs. Thanks, everyone.